On May 24, 2024, a YouTube channel named Lei Real Talk published a video that came directly from the front lines of the Ukraine war. The video was no propaganda piece, and it featured no footage of combat. Instead, it was a simple video, shot using a cell phone, that featured a man talking about the brutality he had seen in the war after serving for just a handful of months. That man was Li Jianwei. A native of Zhengzhou in the Henan province of China, Li had served in the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, for around 2 years before he found himself on the front lines in Ukraine. How did he get there? Like many other Russian soldiers, Li is a mercenary hired by Russia to supplement its armed forces in battle. And as he reveals in the video, being a mercenary doesn't mean that your work will be focused on special operations or that you'll have it any easier than the native Russian troops on the ground. Like so many thousands of Russians before, you'll be placed into the meat grinder of a terrible war of attrition that is very likely to kill you quickly. If it doesn't, you'll be left in a terrible state. So, what can we learn from Li Jianwei and his experiences on the battlefield? The simple answer: the Ukraine war is brutal for all soldiers on the ground. But first, a little about the mercenaries that Russia is bringing into the fold. The use of mercenaries is nothing new to Russia. It has several paramilitary groups already, each of which fights for money and is generally in support of Russia's objectives. Perhaps the most famous of these is the Wagner Group, the paramilitary force that Russia deploys all over the world. But there are others. Redut, for instance, was one of the first groups to enter Ukraine and played a role in the initial invasion back in February 2024. There is also the Don Brigade, which has links to Redut and is listed in Russia's Ready Reserve system of fighters. The point is simple. It's already well known that Russia is using mercenaries. However, the emergence of Li Jianwei's video shows that it's looking further afield to find these mercenaries. Its typical paramilitary groups, though not official parts of the Russian military, were at least Russian in origin. With the introduction of Chinese mercenaries, Russian President Vladimir Putin is showing a willingness to involve anybody willing to fight for his side for money, as well as potentially using mercenary groups to delay what would likely be an unpopular, Russia-wide mobilization to take Ukraine. But back to Li Jianwei. His video begins in what appears to be a military barrack or bunker, to which he was reassigned after spending several weeks taking part in offensives on Ukrainian positions. He begins by telling the audience that he is mostly recovered, before going on to say that he hasn't had a bowel movement in around 2 weeks. That could be indicative of the amount of stress he is under, or, as revealed later, that he simply isn't eating enough to have consistent bowel movements. Or, as Li points out, it could be due to having experienced a massive hemorrhage. Still, seemingly in good spirits, he goes on to talk about how he's eating butter to try to smooth things over. That's resulted in him getting diarrhea and not feeling well. While these may seem like inconsequential details to some, they're indicative of a problem Russia has on the battlefield. It's not providing its soldiers, mercenary or otherwise, with adequate medical support. This is a problem that seems like it's baked into the Russian military. In May 2023, Important Stories reported that around half of the deaths the Russian military has experienced in Ukraine are not caused by life-threatening wounds. Rather, they occur due to improper medical care, or in many cases, a complete lack of care being provided to soldiers who suffer injuries. That's the opinion of Artem Kotulin, who's the head of the Kalashnikov Concern's Tactical Medicine Training Center. In addition to revealing the disturbing statistic, he claims that about a third of the amputations being carried out on Russian soldiers happens because tourniquets are being applied incorrectly. They didn't need to happen. Kotulin puts it simply when talking about what he used to tell his comrades when he was part of Russia's army. You'd better get a minor wound. Get something harder and that's it. You're dead. No one will help you. No one will come. No one will do anything if you can't do it yourself. It appears that Li was one of the lucky ones who managed to escape the battlefield, at least for a time, with only minor injuries. But as he reveals in the video, he saw this approach to Russian tactical medicine more times than he can count. As he talks, Li reveals a small amount about Russian strategy and organization in the field. He talks about being part of a first-wave offensive, which had 12 people and a pair of combat teams. Li was part of a veteran support force designed to help the larger offensive involving Russian soldiers by providing much-needed experience and simply overpowering the enemy. The problem for Li, and many others in that first wave, was that this was their first time in fighting in an urban warfare setting. His combat experience was far less valuable than he anticipated, with the new recruits facing an even bigger challenge. Then he revealed the fatality rates. On average, he claims, the time a Russian soldier has from the moment they enter the battlefield to the moment they die is between 8 and 10 hours. In other words, the vast majority won't make it through an offensive. Li claims to have spent about a month under these conditions, noting that many of the rooms and basements he fought through already being lined with rotting corpses from both sides. People died, constantly. and as Artem Kutulin pointed out, Li's team had no medical personnel to help them. In the end, Li claims only he, a Russian soldier, a fighter from Nepal, and another mercenary he calls Little Black made it back from the offensive alive. All were carrying injuries. The Nepalese fighter had been hit by 4 pieces of shrapnel, with a Little Black also taking shrapnel to the arm and leg. As for Li, he claims to have been hit by a bomb and thrown to the top of one of the houses his team was attempting to take, but he was lucky. He had a bulletproof vest on, meaning that most of his body was protected. He escaped from the situation with minor shrapnel wounds on his arms, though it's likely that the hemorrhaging he talks about was a result of the bomb attack. So we start to see both the nature of the fighting taking place in Ukraine, as well as the makeup of the Russian military conducting strikes on Ukrainian positions. Soldiers are fighting street to street, and as in Li's case, often house to house, to gain any scrap of territory they can. It's partially that weaponization of urban territory that's helped Ukraine survive for so long against Russia. As the Modern War Institute at West Point highlights, the Ukraine war has shown us that all cities are important in war, even those with no military value. Ukraine is defending every city, regardless of its tactical value, because keeping those cities represents a symbolic victory. For Russia, this means its soldiers are being forced into tight urban combat in areas that seem to offer little value, resulting in thousands of soldiers on both sides seemingly dying for no reason. Li offers his own perspective. He calls street combat very brutal, noting that it's not at all like he imagined. That seems to showcase how the use of supposed veterans by Russia isn't as effective a plan as it would seem. A veteran may as well be a new recruit when forced into a type of warfare with which they're unfamiliar. Many died, says Li, pausing for a moment of contemplation before simply repeating those 2 words. Li then moves on to a story involving himself, Little Black, and a pair of Russians. Together they formed a reconnaissance team to scout out a building. The team was also combat ready, with Li saying that if they ran into any Ukrainians, they would be ready to fight. But they didn't find Ukrainian soldiers. Instead, they found drones. Just like Li's group, the drones were conducting reconnaissance. They were also armed with bombs, which Li calls Becheka. He's likely talking about the Bayraktar TB2 drone, which is Turkish-made and has been widely used by Ukraine in the war. The drones are so popular that their Turkish manufacturer is considering plans to open a manufacturing plant in Ukraine, which would employ 500 people and be capable of producing 120 units annually. Li says the drones have 2 modes of attack, with his reconnaissance group ultimately finding themselves being peppered by bomb and kamikaze drone strikes. He got hit by one of the bombs, which destroyed his backpack but left him relatively unscathed. The mercenaries' comments are indicative of the fact that the Ukraine war is unlike any other in terms of how it's being fought. Drones aren't new on the battlefield. They've been used by the US military for well over a decade, primarily with reconnaissance in mind. However, as the Atlantic Council points out, the Ukraine war is the first major conflict in which drone usage has taken center stage. Russia is using Shahid drones, built by Iranian manufacturers, to try and capture cities, while Ukraine is using the previously mentioned Bayraktar drones to fight back. First-person view, or FPV drones, have become remarkably common. As the Atlantic Council notes, those FPV drones provide the operator with a full view of the battlefield and cost very little to deploy. They can be mounted with explosives, as Li describes, and execute targeted strikes because the operator can see what the drone sees as it's in motion. The drones are small and maneuverable, to the point that a skilled operator can fly them through windows or buildings, or even into the hatches of armored vehicles, and once they reach their target, boom. Li's reconnaissance team likely ran into FPV drones during its mission, especially given that they encountered the drones while scouting out buildings. Again, Li was lucky. Though he was caught in an explosion, his rucksack saved him from serious injury. Following his description of the drone attack, Li moves on to the weapons he and his comrades have available. Specifically, he hones in on artillery and mortars and gives a damning appraisal of the situation. The munitions used here are weak. While Li's team had access to mortars, he describes them as old and low-powered Polish-made weapons that likely originated from the Soviet era. He notes the sound that Polish mortars make, describing it almost as though it operates using a hydraulic system that propels the explosives into the air with a quiet whoosh sound. That's different from what Li is used to, as he describes typical mortars as having 3 sounds: the explosion upon launch, a whistle as the weapon flies, and finally the second, much larger explosion when it hits its target. Li's conclusion: these mortars are very dangerous. Again, Li's reports of his experience seems to align with independent reports talking about how out-of-date the equipment Russia's forces receive really is. In October 2022, The Guardian published a report in which it covered a phone call made between a Russian woman named Olesya Shishkanova and her brother, who was a soldier on the front lines of the war. That brother, named Vladimir, not only discussed how the equipment he had was extremely old, but that he was also forced to buy much of it himself. They gave us absolutely no equipment. The army has nothing. We had to buy all our gear ourselves, he complains. I even had to paint my gun to cover the rust. It's a nightmare. Individual experiences like Li's and Vladimir's seem to mirror the wider Russian approach to the war, which is that having outdated equipment is better than having no equipment at all. In August 2023, the Moscow Times reported that Russia had pulled thousands of Soviet-era military vehicles from storage to send onto the battlefield. It notes that the Vagzhanovo military base, a 3.8 square mile Soviet-era base that previously contained 3,840 tanks and armored vehicles, had lost about half of its inventory. That's a trend it reported across multiple Russian bases. Less than a year later, in March 2024, the Jerusalem Post reported that Russia was on the verge of exhausting the Soviet-era equipment these bases house. That was followed by reports that Russia is actually buying Soviet-era weapons back from countries to which it sold them, all to keep its soldiers stocked up with equipment that's out of date but is at least better than nothing. Of course, Ukraine's equipment wasn't any better at the beginning of the war. It's relied as heavily on Soviet-era vehicles and weapons as Russia. However, Ukraine has seen support flood in from the West, which has resulted in it gaining access to far more modern weapons. Russia, though it has plenty of modern weapons of its own, seems content to equip its soldiers with outdated vehicles and weapons because it believes it can win the war by sheer manpower alone. The approach creates terrifying situations for the Russian soldiers on the ground, as Li relates when he discusses what happened to Little Black. He claims that Little Black became afraid during combat on the evening when Li's patrol encountered Ukrainian drones. It's revealed that Little Black had never been in the military before the war and that his previous experience simply involved being along for the ride as part of an armored unit. As Li puts it, he didn't sign up to fight the battle in the woods, and he was scared of urban combat. So Little Black ran. The same goes for the two other Russians in Li's patrol, leaving the mercenary on his own to confront the threat. He claims that he was lucky to escape from the situation alive. Li found an abandoned building that hadn't been discovered by Ukraine or its drones, where he camped out for a while before later reuniting with his team. Little Black wanted to apologize for abandoning the fight, with Li claiming that was okay. He doesn't blame them for running, before going on to claim that these desertions are the reason why you can't trust anybody on the battlefield. Interestingly, Li quickly partially walks back that comment with the qualifier outside China, claiming that the PLA doesn't have this problem as a Chinese soldier is like a brother in life and death. They will sacrifice themselves to save you. A subtle dig at Russia's military when compared to the PLA? Perhaps. However, Li's story of Little Black's decision to run is perhaps more indicative of the way Russia has fought the war than the courage of its soldiers. Many of the army's soldiers are conscripts, with Statista reporting that Russia conscripted around 254,000 people in 2022, followed by 277,000 in 2023. Like Little Black, many of Russia's frontline troops have no combat experience and, as noted earlier, appear to simply be thrown into the meat grinder as Russia attempts to take Ukraine using sheer manpower. Morale is almost non-existent on the front lines. That's why many Russian soldiers are doing exactly what Little Black did, running. However, many more simply aren't coming back. In April 2024, Newsweek reported that Ukraine's military intelligence agency claims that Russia's troops are deserting their posts in the thousands. Specifically, the agency claims that 18,000 Russian soldiers serving in the southern military district have abandoned their posts, with the majority of them being part of the 8th Combined Arms Army. Though these reports are unverified, the Novaya Gazeta also notes that there is a desertion issue in the Russian army. Speaking to a charity named Get Lost, which helps deserting soldiers escape an army and set up new lives, it found that the organization saw a steep uptick in soldiers getting in touch. For instance, January 2023 saw 28 soldiers get in touch seeking help with desertion. A year later, that monthly figure was up to 284, with around half being contracted soldiers and a further 30% being reservists who had been mobilized for the war in Ukraine. All told, Get Lost claims the group has been in touch with 2,000 soldiers who have abandoned the front lines. Russia is trying to respond. Putin has issued a new sentence of up to 15 years in prison for anybody caught running away from the fighting. But as the stats and Li's tale of Little Black point out, many Russians are willing to risk that prison sentence to escape the war's brutality. Li also says that it's not just running away that poses issues for the Russian army. He claims he knows of a Cuban soldier who's faking a heart condition so he wouldn't get sent into the same battle in the woods that Li faced, or assigned to the urban combat on the front lines. Morale is clearly a major problem. Returning to Li's story, those morale issues aren't being made any better by the fact that Russian troops barely have any food with them on the front lines. Li notes that his arrival at the front lines was accompanied by a resupply that allowed him to actually eat a meal. That situation didn't last long. Li says that he ate canned food just 3 times during his deployment, after which he didn't eat anything other than 4 pieces of butter he happened to find while patrolling. There's a sad tinge to this aspect of the video, with Li looking almost wistful as he talks about how he once ate 2 cans of food, one containing beef and the other chicken, after talking about the lack of food on the front. Again, this appears to align with reports from the battlefield. In October 2023, Business Insider reported on an intercepted phone call purported to be between a Russian soldier and his wife. The soldier tells his wife, "We haven't had food delivered to us for 3 weeks. Today is already the 7th day since we've been brought water." The situation had gotten so bad for the soldier that he no longer had the strength to wear his bulletproof vest. The soldier also backs up Li's fatality rate claims, saying that the Russian officials don't care about his unit, which had lost about 100 men in just a few days. Around 18 months earlier, the Modern War Institute also wrote a piece dubbed Russia's Potemkin Army. It noted that the meals, ready-to-eat or MRE rations, issued to the Russian troops as part of the initial invasion in February 2022, contained rations that had supposedly expired in 2015. The situation was so bad, the Institute claims, that Russia had to request up-to-date MREs from China to supplement its troops. This information reveals 2 things about Russia's special military operation. Beyond using outdated equipment and filling its army with conscripts who don't want to be in battle, Russia also appears to have failed to set up any logistical system capable of keeping its soldiers supplied. Food and water aren't making it to the front lines, with some of Russia's soldiers being on the verge of starving as they fight. That's certainly the case for the soldier Business Insider reported on, who was so weak that he couldn't bear to wear a key piece of protective equipment. Li experienced the same issues himself, surviving for several days on just a couple of cans of food and a few pieces of butter. Again, it's the Russian meat grinder at play. The troops appear to be there to soak up Ukrainian ammunition, and they will be replaced when they die. The second thing it reveals is that Putin appeared to assume that Russia would steamroll through Ukraine during the early days of the war. Perhaps that's why he felt it was fine to send troops in with expired rations. They wouldn't be needed long enough for those rations to become a problem. Of course, that turned out to be incorrect, with the war having raged for well over 2 years by the making of this video. A lack of food likely also feeds into the previously mentioned morale problems. Soldiers are unfed, have no water, and are being pushed into battles that they believe they can't win. And worst of all, they never seem to stop. That's according to Li, who notes that he never expected to be on the battlefield for as long as he was. In the past, the longest was 24 hours, he says. We used to rest during the day and fight at night. That isn't the case in the Ukraine war, with Li saying that he has been forced to fight day and night just to survive. It's non-stop, with Li again pointing out that Ukraine has huge amounts of drones that make it so that Russia's troops can't bed in and take a break from the fighting. He's not wrong there. The importance of drones in Ukraine has already been noted, and it's clear that Ukraine is looking to further their use in the conflict. That's according to a March 24 report published by Canada's CBC, which says that Ukraine is not only ramping up domestic production of the FPV drones discussed earlier, but is also counting on its allies to deliver more of them as part of military aid packages. All told, the outlet claims Ukraine wants to have 1 million drones by the end of 2024. That's a little over 2 drones for every Russian soldier in Ukraine, if the Kyiv Post's figure of 450,000 Russian soldiers inside Ukraine is accurate. Li says that the use of drones is so prevalent that Russia's soldiers can often see them coming. They're overwhelming, with drones outnumbering birds in the sky. 1 or 2 will lead the pack, according to Li, with the rest following in droves. The problem, he claims, is that signal interference issues are so rife on the front lines that Russia's soldiers can only interfere with the 2 drones leading the pack. The rest are untouched, and all they do is drop bombs on soldiers and their surroundings. That segues into Li claiming that Ukraine does a great job with intelligence gathering. When one of our tanks got to the battlefield, they'd know, he says. Drones swiftly arrive with anti-tank rockets and C4 explosives. They launch 2 or 3 explosives and the tank becomes a pile. Thus, Li explains, Russia's soldiers often feel that they have nowhere to hide, thanks to the fleets of drones flying through Ukraine's skies, along with the intelligence the country is able to gather. Even something as simple as deploying a tank is fraught with danger. The soldiers never know where the next rocket will come from until it's too late. Combine that with street combat, for which most Russian soldiers are unprepared, and you get a terrifying situation. Ruthlessness exists on both sides, Li claims, with that approach being necessary. Neither can afford to let the other side care for its wounded or gain a foothold during an assault. You have nowhere to hide, Li exclaims. To demonstrate the non-stop nature of the fighting, Li goes on to say that after he'd successfully evacuated from the reconnaissance patrol that saw his 4-person team try to run away, he regrouped with soldiers from other troops. With no time to rest or recover, the newly formed group had to attack a pair of strongholds, losing dozens of people in the process. The casualties were just left on the streets. Over the next 2 weeks, Li's unit launched 3 offensives and failed every time. Li believes they advanced only 100 meters, around 328 feet, during those 3 attacks. Again, that appears to be indicative of Russia's strategy. It's taking territory, it controls much of the Donbass region as well as Melitopol. It's also taking some territory near Kharkiv, but those advances are slow, with Russia inching forward while throwing soldier after soldier against the Ukrainian defenses. Perhaps Putin's approach is simple. It doesn't matter if offensives fail time and again, as long as he can keep sending enough troops to the front lines to slowly wear down the Ukrainian resistance. And every step of the war, as Li points out, Russia's forces not only have to deal with drone strikes, but also have to overcome trenches, barbed wire, and other fortifications, add mines and anti-tank mines into the mix, and every foot gained is a foot that likely cost the lives of several Russian soldiers. Those soldiers don't even have time to think about the mines, says Li. They're too busy dealing with drones, rifle grenades, heavy machine guns. All get focused on them whenever they launch an offensive, cutting huge swathes of the Russian soldiers down as they try to gain ground. It's been mentioned before, and it's worth repeating, the Ukraine war from the Russian perspective is a meat grinder in which thousands are being sacrificed to gain territory. And those soldiers aren't safe even after a successful offensive. Li notes that building defenses is the priority as soon as Russian soldiers take a building, because they know the fighting isn't going to stop. Radio channels are changed hourly, with those who miss the change being out of luck. They're cut out of the loop and have no way of contacting their fellow soldiers unless they happen upon them. As for defenses, the Russian occupiers have to set them up quickly because otherwise their positions will be marked by Ukrainian mortars and pelted with explosives. If you slack off, Li claims, the drones will come, followed by explosives and cluster munitions. The message is simple. Even when Ukraine loses territory, it refuses to give up on it. The video ends with Li changing location, sitting with Little Black in what appears to be a temporary safe house. He tells viewers that he's been in combat for 4 days and nights. He tells us that street combat costs too many lives, including those of his comrades. Of 12 people in his unit, most died and a handful were injured. More came to replace them, Li says, but they died too. The camera turns to Little Black, who Li says follows him everywhere. The man is barely able to mumble words into the camera before Li turns it back on himself. His conclusion about the war? It's all a result of Russian stubbornness. Putin won't end the fighting no matter how many soldiers Russia loses, and it's men like Li and his comrades who'll be dying in their thousands on the Ukrainian battlefield. In the background, the police's Every Breath You Take plays, a brief moment of respite for Li and Little Black before they head back into the fighting. If nothing else, Li's video shows that the reports of conditions, particularly for Russian soldiers in the Ukraine war, don't appear to be exaggerated. But what do you think? Has Russia done a poor job of keeping its people equipped during the fighting? Will its approach of throwing thousands of soldiers at Ukraine work in the end? Tell us what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.